Jeff, you're on mute.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. I'm already talking and I'm already muted. All right, I'll try again. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jeff Hull. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Coaching. And I am thrilled to be here today with our speaker, ADRION Porter, who's going to share his wisdom with us around a topic of diversity that is near and dear to my heart, and one that I think many of us are very interested in learning more about in terms of how it can support our coaching leaders to work through issues of age diversity. I know for myself, as a baby boomer, I've had clients and all different demographics, and I've often had challenges from baby boomers to traditionalists who complain about millennials, to millennials who wonder about their futures and complain in the other direction about baby boomers. And I think there's a lot of anxiety in today's work world as we hear about this so-called great resignation that's happening on so many different demographic levels. So this is an area of diversity that is really unheard for a lot of us, as we don't hear enough about it. And I'm really excited that we have a expert on the topic with us today. So I just want to say hello to everyone and welcome you into the house. And I see people saying hello from different parts of the world. So say hi and let us know where you are. We usually have an incredibly global audience, which is always so exciting. And let me just take a minute to introduce our speaker. As I said, his name is ADRION Porter, and he is a self-professed age inclusion advocate. He is a brand builder and the founder of an organization called Mid-Career Mastery. He's also the creator of a fabulous Over 40 Spotlight series on LinkedIn, and has a very popular podcast called Gen X Amplified. He likes to say that he's on a passionate mission to help people 40 and over thrive at work and maximize their impact on the world. As a keynote speaker and a thought leader, ADRION frequently speaks to organizations around the world using signature frameworks that he's developed to help people get unstuck at mid-career, to value the diversity of different ages, and to build a powerful personal brand at any age. He's worked with many large organizations, including Humana, the Executive Leadership Council, Atlanta Hawks, Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and many other organizations. He's also, as he calls it, a self-proclaimed recovering corporate marketer, and worked in multiple brand organizations like HBO, Cartoon Network, Citibank, and as the CMO of a media and tech nonprofit before going on this crusade to support people to become more knowledgeable and more facile with working through issues of age diversity. So I am really excited. We've been wanting to do this topic for a long time. It is not always easy to find an expert in the subject, and I am thrilled that we have ADRION here with us. So he's going to spend the next 30 or 40 minutes walking through some of his research and his frameworks, and then I will rejoin him for a fireside chat. So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. And with that, hi, ADRION, how are you?
Jeff, how are you doing? Great to see you.
I'm great. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. I am honored for that introduction. Always when I hear introductions like that, I feel like, wow, I did all that. But I'm just getting started. And I'm actually even more honored that I get a chance to spend time with you and the fabulous IOC community from all over the world. So I guess I'm just going to jump right in, right?
Yeah, I'm going to turn off my video and leave you to it.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. So give me just a couple of seconds to share screen, and I have some slides. So let's see. All right, hopefully all of you can see the cover slide. So I'm going to talk to you all about age diversity, why it matters specifically, not only for everyone, but for coaches, because you all are coaches or coach practitioners, or even interested in this field. And so I want to break down 3 reasons why I'm here today, this morning, this afternoon, this evening, no matter where you are around the world. Number one, my goal is to help you first think differently about diversity and inclusion, DE&I, and how age plays an essential role in DE&I. Secondly, I want you to understand why every age is an asset, particularly in the field of coaching and helping people transform their personal and professional growth. And last but not least, I want you, when you leave this session or watch it on the replay, to be in a stronger position to make a significant positive impact on the field of coaching and the world, which is IOC's mission statement, by leveraging the power of age, generational diversity in your practice. Okay. So the first thing I would love for us to do, I want to start off with a quote, one of my favorite quotes. And I would love for you to also try to figure out where it's this quote from. So, and I'll read it here. For what it's worth, it's never too late, or in my case, too early to be whoever you want to be. There is no time limit. Stop whenever you want. One of my favorite quotes. Curious to know if you guys have an idea of where that is from. And if you, let's see, anybody in the chat? Anyone? Julia Child, Betty White. I love it. Wizard of Oz. I love it. Dr. Seuss, Walt Disney. Actually, so it is.
You may be sorry you asked.
No, I love these. It is actually for one of my favorite movies. Hold on. Let me make sure I do this. It is actually from, trying to advance my, oh, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. So, you're never too old or too young to thrive, which is one of the most fascinating meanings behind this movie. Actually, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. And if you have watched this movie, you get to understand why I picked this particular quote from this particular movie. But basically, the premise, if you haven't seen the movie, it's a movie where it stars Brad Pitt, who is born of old age, and he ages backwards throughout the years. And one of the key themes of the movie is that you think differently about age. And in the film, he actually speaks to his father, which at the time he didn't know that that was his father. And his father looked at his hands and his skin and said that, wow, I'm sorry, what's wrong with your hands? And he said, and the Benjamin Button, the character said, I was born old. And his father's character said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And he immediately said, there's nothing wrong with old age. And so I wanted to start off this conversation with that quote to just set the tone and the premise of why we should think about age differently. And again, I want you to remember that you're never too old or too young to thrive. So we all know about the importance of diversity and inclusion. We've heard about it time and time again, especially within the past couple of years due to the murder here in the states of George Floyd. And some of these key bullet points. Why does diversity matters in the world of work? Well, number one, it improves performance and productivity. It increases faster and better problem solving, combines complementary skills, experiences, abilities, perspectives, and networks within your talent pool because you have a vast array of different backgrounds. And it provides, which is the most important thing, especially when it comes to business, an advantage of a higher earnings before income taxes and a more long-term value creation. So diversity matters, but guess what? Age diversity also matters. And I did not change those bullet points because those also apply when it comes to age diversity. And I wanted to emphasize and call that out because a lot of times, again, as Jeff alluded to, or just directly spoke to in the intro, when we talk about D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, a lot of times, and unfortunately, we seldom hear about age as one of those dimensions of difference that's important. Now, not to belittle race or gender or what have you, because those are extremely important. But what's fascinating when it comes to age diversity is that that is the one dimension of difference in diversity that all of us, all of us experience because all of us are aging every day. So it's fascinating that the one dimension of difference that all of us can experience, can empathize, and have a perspective on is one that is seldom talked about, which is why we're having this conversation today. And again, however, because age diversity matters, according to a recent study by PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, only 8% of diversity and inclusion efforts include age. So this is just some of the data points based on some of the facts that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Secondly, a national Forbes Insights study concluded that only 28% of more than 300 senior executives from large global companies said managing the cross-generational issues was a focus, which is unfortunate. And then according to AARP, I'm sure many of you know who AARP is, the great organization, nearly 2 out of 3 workers in a study that they did recently in the US over the age of 45 experience or witness age discrimination. And that is, we can't have a conversation about age diversity and why it matters without talking about the ills of ageism and age bias. Because believe it or not, I'm sure some of you may have personally experienced this, ageism is alive and real. For example, the Age Discrimination Employee Act, which was started in 1967, forbids age discrimination against people who are 40 and over, right? Yet it does not even protect workers under the age of 40. And I wanted to call that out because we're going to talk a lot about age bias and discrimination for people that are 40 plus. But it's really important that we also recognize that age discrimination goes both ways. And it applies to the younger generations we're going to talk about as well. But also when it comes to age discrimination, especially against those 40 and up, in certain industries such as tech and advertising, discrimination is very, very rampant and very, very prevalent. For example, one of the individuals that I actually featured in my Spotlight series, and I also interviewed on Fabulous Over 40 on LinkedIn, his name is Walter T. Geer. He's an advertising executive in the States, in New York. And he did a post on LinkedIn a couple of years back, maybe about a year and a half, that went totally viral. Forbes wrote about it. And he basically said that 40 under 40, 30 under 30, I'm so tired of it. This is great, but what about those individuals over 40? What about the hardworking men and women that have to go home, go to work 9 to 5, come home, take care of 3 kids, juggling aging parents, children? What about that recognition? Not to diminish the recognition of hardworking younger individuals, but what about the older individuals? So I invited him for a conversation, not only on my show, but I spotlighted him. And in our conversation, he said, and this is a quote from the podcast, we need to all sit back and think about when we hire people, let's not exclude someone because of the way they look or their age. Talent is talent. And again, I thought that was very important to call that out because he lit a fire with that conversation, but it's something that really we all know, but we don't really talk about as much. So age discrimination, ageism, includes both conscious and unconscious bias, which we've heard of that term a lot of times when it's applied to general D&I. But believe it or not, we're all are a little bit ageist, just like from the great Broadway play that Jeff is very familiar with, Avenue Q, we could all be a little bit racist, right? But a lot of times we make statements that we may not understand overtly how ages they are. For example, even 40 is the new 20, right? 50 is the new 30. Well, to me, 40 is the new 40. 50 is the new 50, because we should embrace our age with excitement and understand that there's nothing wrong with being your age. For example, hey, you look good for your age. We say that all the time, but what exactly does that mean? What is the undercurrent in that statement? And then we all may be familiar with this, especially in the States, the okay boomer phenomenon. So this is when a couple of years ago, a lot of younger generations started to use this hashtag okay boomer across multiple social media platforms to basically connote that, speaking to the older generation that don't understand young people, they don't understand trends. So they would say, okay, boomer. Now, I want to speak to that a little bit more because outside of the Western world, okay, boomer may not be a very popular term, or even boomer, but we'll talk about that. But when we think about the okay boomer phenomenon, what would happen if people replace boomer with a descriptor based on even race or gender? It would be totally uncalled for, right? Just like boomer is okay boomer, but we don't think about it. So for example, I did a post in an article on LinkedIn called Why It's Never Too Late to Thrive at Work and in Life. And just to speak a little bit more about ageism, one of the comments that I wanted to highlight here from someone overseas, and he basically said, inspiring thoughts, Adrian, inspiring thoughts. I heard a team leader and manager say his older workers didn't know how to use the current technology and the younger ones were unwilling to work. Life is all about attitude. And I thought that was a great comment because what he did, he spoke to the age discrimination and the age bias and how it applies both ways. So you can be, especially at a manager level, you could be ageist to someone that's older and also younger, but it has no place in the working world. And so why does all of this matter? Well, believe it or not, now there are up to 5 generations in today's workforce, which has never happened. And I'm going to unpack these generations a little bit more, because we cannot have, or we should not have, an age diversity conversation without talking about generations. So there are 5 generations in today's workforce. Those are our traditionals, and I'll actually outline it here. The traditionals, which are born between 1900 and 1945. You have the baby boomer, which many of you may have heard of, which are born between the years of 46 to 64. Then you have people like me, the proud Gen Xers, who are born anywhere between 1965 to 1980. And then we have those good old millennials, 81 to 96. And then the up and coming, especially in the working world, the Gen Z. Now, these years were based on Pew Research data. And a lot of times when you see these generational cohorts, you may see years that vary from these years, but on average, this is kind of the widely accepted range. And below each generation you see on this slide are a couple of bullet points that are descriptors or characteristics that have been assigned to many of these cohorts, which some of them may be true, some of them may not, but I just thought it would be important to highlight. But what's also interesting is that the generational conversation and some of the unfortunate stereotypes, i.e. millennials are lazy, Gen Xers are slackers, baby boomers don't know how to deal with technology, which are so stereotypical and very unfortunate. They've been around, believe it or not, for multiple life cycles based on generations. So this particular slide is just a snapshot of some of the most popular magazine covers here in the States, dating all the way back to, believe, and I don't have my glasses on, so I'm definitely Gen Xer, but the first Time magazine cover, the baby boomers turned 40, right? So this was probably what, 19, I would say 85 or 2005. The baby boomers turned 40, 20 something, applied to Gen Xers. The myth of Generation X, slackers, you dismissed us, me generation, millennials, okay millennial. So as you see here, the heightened conversation around describing a generation has been here forever. And just like Gen Xers, we've been called slackers, we've been called this, but it's important for us, especially as practitioners of professional growth, to be wary of these stereotypes, but look at generations from a different lens. So let's get back to the world of work. So why I thought it was so important to highlight that there are 5 generations in the working world today, because many of you will be engaging with many of these individuals in the workplace. And so if you look at this chart, this is based on Pew Research. And I mentioned before, look back in 1994 at the beginning of the chart. You see here, there are only 4 generations really represented in the labor force: boomers, Gen Xers, the silent greatest, or traditionals, if you saw the previous slide, and really actually 3 if you look at it. But then around 97, 2000, here come the millennials. But if you go all the way up, and this is up to 2017, but I have another chart to show something a little bit more current, there are 5 generations represented. Now you may ask why? Well, it's because, number one, many of the older individuals are working longer. We're living longer as a society. We're working longer. Maybe it's due to the Great Recession. We have more vigor as we get older, which we do. And especially in a knowledge-based economy, we're still able to contribute to society and the workplace, even at the age of 67 or even 80 or 90. And so there are 5 generations in the world of work, which is really, really important to know. And so this particular slide even highlights the older skew of this labor force. Based on the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, workers 65 and over will account for more than 60% of projected labor force growth from 2020 to 2030. So if you look there and you wonder, wow, the tapestry of generations, of perspectives, of ages, of age cohorts are increasing in the workforce. Why doesn't D&I address that? Why don't we address age diversity? Well, again, going back to generations, and here are a couple of more highlights when it comes to the power of multi-generational workforces. Again, increased resilience, increased productivity, a stronger talent pipeline. So all of these just speak to, again, why it's so important to understand that when we're in the world of work and we're engaging and interacting with multiple perspectives, including the fresh perspectives of Gen Z to the elder statesmen and the seasoned professionals of baby boomers and silent and traditionalists, we have to have a strategy. We have to have an approach when we think about transformative change. And it's really important to understand the nuances of each generation. Now, I thought I would have a little fun here too, because as we talk about generations, this was actually a snapshot of a feature on a popular network. Well, you can see it says CBS, but they were talking about an article about millennials being the burnout generation. And it was really right before the pandemic, I believe. And they had all the generations listed based on peer research. You had the silent generation, the baby boomers, the millennials, the post-millennials, which are the Gen Zs. Wait, what happened here? Total 65 million cohort of individuals were taken out. My generation, Generation X. So we talk about stereotypes and how we have different nuances and dynamics as a cohort. This is one of them. Generation X, we tend to be forgotten. And also, I would say this when it comes to generations, because a lot of times when I have these conversations about generations, I will get the counter argument, well, why do we have to characterize ages and individuals in generations? Why do we do that? Is it a true characterization? And I always say this, which is a very valid point, is that the way that I look at generations is really a cohort of how the time and space of the age that you grew up during a particular time and the shared experiences that you have with other individuals during that time. Because I do believe that those shared experiences and external dynamics that happen to you, especially during your coming of age cycle, does influence and impact how you see the world, how you approach the world. For example, if you are someone that came of age at the advent of technology and that's all you know, you will approach the work world and have certain expectations that may be different from, let's say, a baby boomer who did not during their coming of age. And so they may place different value sets on different experiences. Doesn't mean that they're right or wrong, but it's very important to understand those different nuances and how people see the world based on the time that they come of age. So with that, they left out an entire generation. So that's why I do what I do on some of my platforms. So you're going to forget about Gen X? Well, then I'll just amplify Gen X. We have a podcast, which is dedicated to giving a voice to the powerful generation between, I always say, those brilliant boomers and magnificent millennials. And so I always want to make that caveat because it should always be about bridging the generational divide and amplifying the varied strengths and perspectives across all ages. Again, all ages. So why does age diversity matter for coaches? Why does it matter for coaches? So again, taking a step back, I wanted you to understand the landscape of how does age fit into this portfolio of conversations when it comes to dimensions of diversity. Why, number one, we can't have a conversation about age diversity without mentioning the ills of age bias, both conscious and unconscious, and ageism, and also understand the different dynamics and the landscapes of the generations that are in our workforces. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons of many. The 3 reasons that you will see are including but not excluding. They're inclusive, but not limited to, I should say, of multiple reasons why age diversity matters for coaches. Number 1, the post-pandemic world of work. Okay. This is where we are right now. The post-pandemic world of work. There was the moment before COVID and after COVID, like BC, right? The world has changed forever. We all know this. And it affected many individuals in many different ways, but it pertains to the age cohort. Several studies, this is based on the Economic Policy Institute. Oldest workers were hit the hardest when it came to job search and recession. Older workers were less likely to lose their jobs because of their tenure and experience, believe it or not. But the recession caused by the pandemic has been anything but typical. So if you look there, the age cohorts 25 to 54, 55 to 64, 65 plus, you see the number of employed around February 2020. Then you see the number of employed May 20 and the percentage change. And we're only talking about 4 months or so, right? I don't even have data here on this slide that reflects where we are now or even in 2021, the year prior. But as you can see, the percentage change varies, but the 65 plus got hit the hardest. Also, there was a great study by a phenomenal nonprofit organization called Generation, where they did a study called Meeting the World's Mid-Career Moment. And they fielded research based on a cohort of age 45 to 60, what they deemed as mid-career, of individuals and how they were being affected by the pandemic, their hiring experiences. And for them, especially when they wanted to switch jobs, they had a worse work-life balance resulting from COVID than before COVID. Many of the hiring managers did not feel that the mid-career workers who were in that mid-40s to 60 age range had the technical skills needed to even do the work. Many of them even felt that the older generations or the elder workers did not understand how they could be a great fit. So you can see the pandemic hit people in many different ways. And so when I look at this for the profession and the coaching practitioner profession, this is really a reset moment. Professional and personal growth transformation has become priority number one during COVID and after COVID, and it will always continue. So we talk about the great resignation. What it really is the great reflection or the great reinvention, or even as LinkedIn likes to say, which I agree, the great reshuffle. And this is applied to all ages. Generational dynamics and conflicts, they really became heightened and pronounced during the pandemic. Okay, again, okay, boomer, Gen Z, Generation X, for example, when we all had to shelter at home, there was a big viral conversation around Gen X's. We're used to this. We're used to TV dinners, eating pot pies, coming home as a latchkey kid, being at home, not going out. Hey, we can handle this, which there's some truth to that, me being a latchkey only child growing up as well as a Gen Xer. But again, those conversations were pronounced, and a lot of times it landed on kind of an unproductive conversation when it comes to those generation dynamics. This is a reset moment. It's an opportunity for your clients to up-level their skills, both technical and transferable, human skills, leadership, collaboration, communication, all those skills that you all as a coaching community are primed to help solve. And then considerations of age and lifestyle impact during this reset moment. Older workers, mothers, diverse communities, work from home models now. Now, many companies are saying, hey, you can work from home forever. Well, how does that affect the older generation that still have kids at home, that have aging parents, that need to have certain different type of jobs? One size does not fit all. So how can you as a coaching community help with that? All right, number two, reason why age diversity matters for coaches. The midlife, mid-career malaise is real. So previously I was speaking to more of a macro view of why it matters from a world of work, but let's get into literally at that client level. And this is an area that I'm very passionate about because this is literally where I sit, and my mission, passion is literally to eliminate the midlife, mid-career malaise and help transition that into mastery. And so the reason that I say that it's real was very fascinating. And I found this from my own research for many years studying, which was born out of my own personal experiences. When I was in my mid 40s or early 40s, I should say, I felt a sense of malaise. And notice I did not say midlife crisis, which I don't believe really doesn't exist for a lot. I said malaise. And the malaise is a phenomenon that many people experience because based on documented data, particularly studies that have been popularized by two economists, David Blanchflower and Andrew Oswald. They're two labor economists who were studying the relationships between work and happiness with work and also employment levels, right? And in their longitudinal studies and research, they found that on average, self-reported in your adult life, your self-reported level of work-life happiness and satisfaction follows this U-shape as you age. And again, the initial studies were, I believe in the late 1990s or early 2000s and across 132 countries, 95 developing countries, 32 developed countries, numerous thousands and thousands of individuals. And they found the same U-curve They call it a U, like looks like a smile, right? But it's not. That as you age in your adult life, your level of happiness tends to follow, goes down. And the nadir, the lowest point is during that middle period from 40 to 65. The lowest point actually being 47 years of age. And so when we talk about the malaise or the funk, or even some people may think it's a crisis, we're biologically wired. Now, why is that? Well, some of the feedback has been because you're starting to level set your expectation of where you thought you would be younger in age to what the reality is. External factors, marriage or relationship, work, your goals you haven't achieved yet. And as you start to level set those expectations, you tend to feel this slump. And don't even think about the pandemic has just heightened that. And again, this is not only in the US, but this has been reported across multiple countries. As you can see, the relationships between happiness and age, they're all follow the very similar trajectory. The US or the United Kingdom. Now, your lowest point may vary, as you can see here. Russia, I feel sorry for my Russians out there because it's not necessarily a U, but it's just a downward slope. But we're going to fix that. We're going to fix that. But as you can see here, this is just not a Western phenomenon or United States phenomenon. And believe it or not, multiple studies, even beyond the ones that Oswald and Blanchflower did, also noticed that this same phenomenon applies to even apes, believe it or not. So biologically, we're wired. We fall into this midlife slump. So what being who I am and what my mission is, I wanted to understand and study, well, how can we help flatten the U curve? Even though, great, we're going to expect to feel some unhappiness during this middle period. So I want to come up and codify a framework, which I use. And I'm going to go through this briefly because I do a workshop on this in a separate keynote, and I use a lot of this in my coaching clients, but something that are called the 3 pillars of getting unstressed and unstuck, because a lot of times we do feel stressed and stuck during this middle period. And again, as we think about coaching and your clients, understand that those individuals who are in that period of their life or careers may be going through this. And so what I call this is a practical framework for transforming that feeling of malaise and misery to a magical moment of a mastery, if you will, in your middle years. So number one, I broke it down into mindset, and then secondly, meaning and milestones. And I'll unpack those a little bit more. So mindset is really all about reframing and resetting. You're in your 40s, even in your 30s, or if you're in your 60s, it's important to understand that you always should have a growth mindset. Start here. I'm sure many fans, I'm a fan of Carol DeWitt from Stanford. And I encourage you, if you haven't, get her book Mindset, where she unpacks this a lot more, not a little bit. But when we in this phase of our lives and careers, it's always understand that you have to have a growth mindset. You can learn new skills. Things can change. You can redefine your attitudes and expectations around your age and embrace gratitude daily. Again, this is some of the things that we deal with when it comes to this particular behavioral pillar, but it starts with reframing and resetting. What does it mean to be 40, to be 45, to be 50, to be 65, looking for work? How do I change my mindset? The middle pillar is meaning. This is all about discovering and defining. What is your purpose at this stage of your life and your career? How do you connect the dots of your professional and personal past to your present? What are those common things where people said that you thrive, that gave you life? And how do they all connect to be able to lead you to the path where you are now professionally? Let's explore fulfilling work, meaningful work. And then also, this applies to all pillars, but I put it here. It's important and imperative, if you're feeling stressed and stuck, to lean in your community. Find your people. It's so important because a lot of times when we're in this stage of our lives and careers at this age, we're working solitude. We're so busy, but that's why having shared community is really important. And then the last pillar, but not least, is milestones. Establish and achieve. And a lot of times you think about, we have all these milestones that we go after when we're younger, right? Turn 18, at 21, you're able to buy alcohol if you want, you get your first car. And then the later years, you have grandkids, you retire. But in that middle, there tends to be what they say like a long run-on sentence, just no periods, no milestones. Well, what does that do for us when we're thinking about professional growth? That's why in this framework, I say establish new milestones. If you're feeling in this malaise period, you still Establish both small micro milestones, things that you can accomplish daily or weekly, and then longer micro milestones. Define actionable markers for success, and then incorporate a reward system where you can celebrate those milestones. And so again, I went through this quickly, but when we think about getting out of this malaise feeling and just kind of these three behavioral areas of transforming that malaise to mastery, mindset, meaning, and milestones. And again, I could spend more time on this, but I want to just briefly help you guys understand as you're coaching your clients, it's coming into those middle years, that malaise and model will help you succeed. And then the third matters for allies. You're perfect because of what you do and the nature of your work. One of the individuals, a good friend of mine that I interviewed and also highlighted, who's also a New York Times bestselling author, a workplace speaker, part of Marshall Goldsmith's 100 Coaches. She mentioned during my conversation with her in my research and interview, she said, I really advocate that any meeting, any committee, any team you form has to have every generation. That type of approach is so applicable and valuable when we're coaches, when we're talking to individuals across multiple generations. It's very imperative. You guys are primed for this. Why? Because coaching is an interpersonal process that helps people achieve positive change and growth. That's how coaching is defined. And not just from me. Don't take it from me. Take it from the IOC, which is sourced from them. And so with that, and you're thinking about why this age diversity matters, because your client base more than likely would represent a tapestry of multiple ages, multiple generations, now and also in the future. And just always remember this, there's no time limit, maximum or age limit for growth. So what does that mean? If you are in the business of transforming growth, of accelerating personal and professional growth, understand your clients, no matter what their age, that you can use these frameworks to help them combat ageism, to accelerate, and just be in a better position to thrive. Again, coaches are also best positioned to encourage mutual mentoring, which I want to talk about a little bit more. But when we think about this 5-generational workplace, a lot of times when we think about mentorship, usually it's from a top-down, an elder statesman to a seasoned or I should say younger employee. But mentorship goes both ways. For example, me as a Gen Xer, as a mid-career Gen Xer, there's a lot that I can learn about when it comes to digital tools from, let's say, a Gen Z or a millennial, the same as that seasoned or fresh perspective can learn something from someone who's seasoned when it comes to whether it's leadership or my experiences I can share with them. Community, collaboration. Again, mutual mentoring is so key. So as you as coaches and practitioners, for you to help facilitate those conversations based on your background and skill set will help. And then also, this is an opportunity for a cohort of coaches across multiple generations that are even watching this now to align based on your different superpowers to provide those solutions accordingly. Again, not all coaches are in their 40s or in their 50s or even in their 20s or 30s. However, you all have very shared experiences. You came of age in different times. You approach the world differently. You have your own dynamics that you go through. How can you collectively as a coaching community use your superpowers across multiple generations to come together to provide the solutions? And the best group of superheroes that I can think of that across multiple ages probably share this is we think about you guys could be the age inclusion Avengers of coaching. So think about some of the characters in the Avengers. Tony Stark, he's 49 years old. Steve Rogers, Captain America, 101. Then you have Black Widow, who's 35. You have a 16-year-old Gen Z or Spider-Man, Peter Parker, right? He's part of the Avengers crew. Doctor Strange, Thor, 1,500 years old. Bruce Banner, Hulk, 50. So as you can see here, coaching, providing solutions, creating impact, being age inclusion advocates is not limited to just one age. And I like to also cap this off with another comment that from the article I shared earlier and that I thought was very telling that he wrote back. And he said, good weekend read, speaking to the article about why it's never too late to thrive, no matter your age. At 58, I took the online MIT Sloan School of Management course on blockchain technologies. That decision, plus a few others, has launched a new phase of usefulness and application, highlighting the concept of turning knowledge into wisdom most needed by those coming along behind. Don't retire. The world needs the wisdom of the OG. Figure out a way to stay in the game and bring the younger crowd along. Yeah, it's frustrating and hard, but that's life. don't check out. Hashtag the Great Resignation, career changers. And see, he's a global executive strategy consultant. He's embraced this idea that every age is an asset, that we're all living in a world with multiple generations. Again, this is the one dimension of difference that we all share. We all are either have been younger, we're currently at our age, or we will get older, God willing. And so this is fascinating. So I will leave you kind of circling back with my favorite movie, one of my favorite movies, and a movie that really speaks to how it's never too late and your age is an asset and how you should look at age differently. And in that movie, Benjamin Button, when he's taken his father in his last days to overlook the sunset, something that his father always talked about, he loved doing, but he was at a point of his life where he wasn't as nimble. Benjamin Button took him out to the pier, overlooked the sunset. And there's a quote from a poem that he wrote during the movie. He said, "I hope you meet people with a different point of view. I hope you live a life you're proud of. If you find that you're not, I hope you have the strength to start all over again." Think about that quote when it comes to age. No matter where you are in your generational life cycle, no matter where you are in your work life cycle, it's important that you meet and interact with people for different points of views, whether it's gender or race, definitely age, because you will meet people at different ages, that you're proud of that. But also remember that it's never too late. And if you feel that it's too late, you can always start over. All right. Thank you so much. I hope this helps you become better coaches. And I look forward to having some conversations with you in the Q&A if we have time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adrian. That was amazing. Oh my God.
Let me stop my share.
Yeah, that was awesome. And folks, please take the time if you have a question to put it in the Q&A. The chat box has been so alive that we would never find your question at this point. So please put it in the Q&A if you'd love to try to, we have a few minutes, want to try to get to as many questions as we can. The first thing I just want to share, Adrian, is that I am so moved by your very simple but profound framework, because as you were walking through it, the 3 M's, yes, mindset, meaning, and milestone, you know, I totally appreciate that you were focused initially on this malaise that supposedly happens in midlife.
Yes.
But it became very aware of the fact that those 3 cornerstones of your framework could really be applied in almost any situation, right?
It can, yes.
Because if you have like a baby boomer who's struggling with a millennial, which I have had many, or vice versa,
yes,
you know, you can ask them to reflect on the mind, their narrative, their mindset around what is in the way of them being able to cross the divide.
Yes.
And then you could explore with them as a coach, what is the meaning that they're trying to adjust to? What is the shift? As you said, there's just a huge change in values and meaning, and then ultimately set some milestones. What if maybe your goal would be able to work effectively with people 2 generations away from you? That would be such a neat goal to have, no matter which end of the spectrum you're on. So I just want to appreciate you for, it's simple, but it's very, very profound. So thank you.
Well, Jeff, I truly appreciate that. And yeah, I was going to speak to that because when it was designed, obviously based on any movement or anything worth anything, a lot of times it's based on Malaise. And I kept, based on interviews and research and my own feelings, but it all fits. It's like you start here, but I do notice you're right. It applies to your growth. It's just that along that curve are in that middle period. But if you, even, and it also, before you get to 45, if you can already go into it with a strong mindset, and also can already start being in quest for that search for meaning and establishing milestones early. Because a lot of times, again, we don't look at intentionally milestones when we're in this middle period. We're just at the day to day, right? What's my middle-aged milestone? Well, you can create some. So, but I appreciate you seeing that it's applicable to everyone.
Yeah, no, it's really great. So we're getting some wonderful questions.
Okay.
And let me hop right in with this question from Donna. Right. She's asking, you know, what are you seeing that organizations, since you're kind of on a crusade in this space, are you seeing that organizations are beginning to pay attention to age diversity? And I would add, what can we do as coaches to raise the visibility of the issue?
It's a great question. Who's that from? the name?
Donna
Donna.
Aldrich.
Thank you, Donna, for that question. So number one, I would say I've seen it, but not enough, to be quite honest and candid with you. And the only reason why I've seen it because I'm out having the conversation. So it's probably a response to my encouraging the dialogue. But without me just kind of seeing it, observing it without my involvement, I'm not seeing it enough. And I will say I've seen it more because of the pandemic. And these conversations have been heightened now, especially because they're affecting so many people. Again, I have a 13-year-old son who's a Gen Z. I have a 6-year-old daughter who's a Gen Alpha, which I didn't talk about, which that's a whole, after Z's are starting over with the Greek alphabet. But yes, it's crazy. But for him, that conversation became heightened because of his age, because he's coming of age. He spent an entire year over Zoom doing learning, right? And so the conversation about Gen Z and COVID and at home, but then you start talking about what about the mothers that are rearing though, and the fathers too. And so I've seen those heightened conversations, but not enough. And I would say as coaches, I would say it's anytime you're having a DE&I or diversity, equity, inclusion conversation, just be intentional. If you have to repeat it in your mind, include age, introduce age in the conversation. And you can do it from a juxtaposition because again, it's the one dimension of difference that all of us experience. And so just like maybe based on your background, you can't automatically introduce a conversation with DE&I when it comes to race because you don't have that experience. But all of us are aging by the minute, actually. And it's a good thing because if we stopped aging, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. That would not be a good thing. So just be intentional. So just be intentional.
So that segues a great segue to another question that Elise Phillips is asking about coaching questions. So if you were, and she says, young, old clients. So in other words, if you're working with young folks that are frustrated, or you're working with old folks who are older, not old, but older folks that maybe not as conscious or as aware, what kinds of questions would you ask them to get this issue of the divide and of the challenge either raised or improved?
Yes, a great question. I would just try to encourage a very candid, open conversation about perspectives and perceptions, right? And you can, as coaches, you're skilled at kind of fielding, the comfort levels of that. But just start maybe having a multi-generational conversation. You can start small. Just, hey, when you think about being 45 or 40, what immediately comes to mind? And just try to get those things out in dialogue and just to see what are the common themes and just try to encourage, positively, just let's have a conversation. I would say that's the way you start, because until you can encourage and help individuals speak about those feelings, they will always be hidden. So I would say just try to facilitate an open dialogue about perceptions, because again, a lot of this is about perception. Age bias is about perception. Generational stereotypes is about perception. And again, some of them may be true, some of them may be totally off base, but it's always about perception. And we can't let that perception be always a reality, because we would never thrive, especially when it comes
I appreciate that. I think as a coach, when I encounter this, and I'm not saying that I have the magic formula, but I will often ask people, and you're using the word perception, but I would often ask my client, what is the narrative that you have around someone who's 20 years older than you? Or what is the story that you have about someone who's 20 years younger than you or 10 years younger than you? Because we all make up sort of stories about, and they are unique. And as you said, I think you rightly point out, there's some element of value and truth to the story.
Right.
But as a coach, our job is to help people realize that it's a story. It's not a fact. Right.
Yes, it's a story. And just to also speak to that, Jeff, because I talked earlier about how we define generations. Again, this is a conversation I always have. And again, I think there's validity in that, because based on perception, when you came of age in the 70s or 80s, we didn't have the advent of social media. We didn't see the stereotype dialogue and narratives constantly in our face and our phones day by day that's helped shaping those perceptions. So if you're younger now, or if you're millennial or Gen Z, and you're constantly seeing it in your stream, okay, boomer, Gen Xers are slackers, boomers don't know what they're doing, millennials are this, millennials are that, millennials are lazy. That's heightened perception, and it may alter your feelings and thoughts about someone who's not your age, as opposed to someone that's older, that's dealing with this now, but we have all these other things that we're dealing with. It may not affect our bias. So again, you always have to the external factors that may impact perceptions, and have, which is a big word that I didn't mention, but I always like to mention in every conversation, empathy. Empathy.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
actually even the previous question. Well, what can we do? Empathy, empathy, empathy. Always be empathetic, especially when it comes to generational and age differences. So empathy is a key
That's great.
keyword.
Yeah. So there's a really good question from Tony Jones. Very specific. I'm just going to read the actual question because it's he or she
Okay.
wrote it beautifully. What steps would you advise for someone to navigate potential age discrimination that they may run into when they're applying for a job?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's a
So
tough one.
it's a tough way. No, and I'm gonna give the disclaimer that this is not Bible or set in stone because you're gonna get various answers. For example, I've had conversations where individuals will say I should take off the years of my graduations from on LinkedIn. Now, I would say honestly, if you, I'm not opposed to that. I don't have years on my, because I think they don't really mean anything after a certain age. Years, so I'm fine with that. But then let's talk about, well, what if I have 25 years of experience? Should I just start with 10 years prior as of now? Because if I show that I've been working in the world for 25 years, they're already going to make that assumption. Again, my personal opinion is it depends on the type of experience. You can't put everything in a bubble, because honestly, 20 years ago, if you worked for a huge brand and you made significant impact and everyone knows that brand, that's still relevant, if you remove your relationship with that brand, it may dilute the perception of you. So I say put it on there, but just be very crafty and skillful how you talk about that narrative there. So I would say it depends. It's all about your story. And so then there's conversations about, profile pictures, coloring my hair. Again, that's a personal opinion, so I'm not going to give a directive, but I would say just use your comfort level. And honestly, and I'm going to be very candid, if they don't want you for your age, then maybe that's not the best place for you to be. Now, again,
Good point.
people make tough decisions financially, so you always can't just rely on that. So
Right.
that's being an age inclusion advocate. I'm going to always stand by that, but just be you. But when it comes to some of the little particulars like years or graduation dates, make sure that it's all about your narrative and your story. If you can craft and communicate and amplify a great story, even if you have 20 or 30 years of experience or even 10, that you feel will add value to that particular role, then just go all in. That's a great question. It's gonna never stop, that question too. So
yeah, no, it's a tough one, but I think you're right that it really has to be customized to your values, and to think about the organizations that you want to work for and what are their values, and look for alignment, and then feel what feels core to your truth. So it's
exactly
really well put. So the question that another question that came in that I'm sort of sitting with, and I've lost, oh, here it is from Nancy, I'm trying to read so many of them.
Sorry.
She's asking, why do you think that ageism is so rarely discussed? What makes it difficult for this particular form of diversity to get more amplification?
I think it's great. Who's that from? Nancy?
Nancy Harris. Yeah, it's a great question.
Nancy, thank you. Great question. I think it's rarely discussed for the reasons that it should be discussed, because we all experience it. And it's kind of a weird answer, but I think that's probably what, because for something that we all experience and we all deal with, it may not be top of mind. It's just like, and I joke about, like, I lived in New York for 10 years, right? And I've not once visited the Statue of Liberty because it was always there. And so I'm like, I'll get to it, right? And now I moved away from New York, and I hate that I never visited some of those great places because I took it for granted. So I think we take it for granted, and it may not be as overtly flashy from a visual or visceral standpoint, as opposed to race or gender. But I think that's why, because we become settled, is that it's just what we do. We age. However, I think for that same reason, it's important for people like us who are having these conversations to bring it out there. So I think that is probably the reason, because we all experience it, and it's the landmark that's always there, and we'll say we'll get to it, and we never do.
Yeah, and what I appreciate about what you're sharing is that I think that there's two ends of a spectrum, because on the one hand, there is a fear that if we bring up things like age, we're going to end up going down a path that takes us into stereotypes. And I think that there is an anxiety I notice in some of my older clients and even some of my younger clients. They think about the issues of, oh, I'd love to have a mentor or in one direction or the other, but I'm fearful of bringing it up because I'm not sure that's sensitive and all of that. And you add to that the layer of complexity that you pointed out, which is that there's now 5 generations in the workforce.
Right.
And that it is really complex to try to understand the differences and distinctions. Yes. I mean, I'm always shocked when I think there was a time before the iPhone. Like, was there really a time before the iPhone that we did there, you know, or you run into somebody, you remember that folks my age, I'm a boomer, there was a time before Facebook. Like, there was a time before LinkedIn. You know, I ran into a client the other day who doesn't use LinkedIn, and I was shocked. And then I thought, maybe I should be looking at my narrative, like, wow, what's my story? So I think there's fear built in, and then there is, but at the same time, and maybe this is an opportunity for you to make some final comments as we wrap. There's a huge opportunity because coaches are the ones that can bring up these sensitive subjects, right? Yes, to cross that divide and use a framework like yours. So, you know, last thoughts from you about what we can do as coaches to bring this the kind of visibility it deserves.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And thank you again to the IOC community for those of you with your great questions. I truly appreciate it. Again, I would just leave you with some of those key points from our conversation earlier and some of those slides is that it's just take a step back and understand that this is a dynamic and dimension of diversity that we all experience in one way or the other. And so as coaches, I would just encourage you to, number one, look inward and try to see if there are any of those feelings or experiences personally that you have either overcame, that you have helped, and what are some of the winning accelerators, right? And then look also outwardly and just start to notice, be observant, and look at those dynamics, and then look at your own methodologies and frameworks, you know, and definitely use mine if you feel, and to see how you can help. But I would say just start initiating the conversation, because again, this isn't talked about enough. And so it becomes, you know, not visible. But if you start paying attention more, you start to realize, oh my God, maybe I have age bias in what I say.
We do.
Well, you know, we do. And so I would just say, be intentional, just have the conversation. And continue to do with the great work that you're doing, because you all are the Avengers could be the Avengers of age inclusion, based on your varied backgrounds and skill sets. And, you know, we all age, all of us are aging. So.
Right. And we're working longer than ever and making a contribution longer than ever.
Yeah. You and I will be Zooming until the next 20th. Well, by then we'll probably have virtual. You'll be here next to me or something. And, and I'll have a little bit more gray in my hair than I do now, but it's all good. I love my gray.
Well, I really appreciate your bringing your wisdom, your research, and your input and suggestions for us, because I think this is the beginning of a conversation that needs to be amplified. And I am grateful for you taking the time to be with us. And I just want to thank everyone for joining us. The recording will be available tomorrow. So on our website, you can see the slides, you can see the recording, and we will save the chats and the questions. We obviously were not able to get to all the questions. And then I will also encourage you that I'm going to get to see Adrian again, because next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern time, we're going to have a LinkedIn Live conversation. And in that situation, I'm going to ask a few more personal questions to get a little more detail about his passions and his story. And hopefully we will all learn how to amplify this conversation and really make a contribution to bringing down the walls, I would say, between these generations. So thank you, sir. We really appreciate your time, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank you, guys. Love it.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.